Doctor wiped the sweat from her forehead as she climbed the rocky path toward the crystal caves. Her boots crunched on the purple sand that covered most of planet 442C. She had been living on this strange world for 6 months now, studying the local animals and plants. The research station felt like home, but sometimes she needed to get out and explore. The caves sparkled in the orange sunlight. They were made of some kind of crystal that grew naturally on this planet. Had visited them many times before, always finding something new and interesting. Today felt different though. The forest was too quiet. Usually, she could hear the calls of flying creatures and the rustling of small animals in the bushes. Now there was only silence. Pulled out her scanner and checked for dangerous gases or radiation. Everything looked normal. She stepped into the largest cave, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The crystal walls threw back rainbows of light in all directions. It was beautiful, but something was wrong. Then she heard it, a small, sad sound that made her heart skip. It sounded like crying, but not human crying. Moved deeper into the cave, following the sound. Her flashlight beam swept across the floor until it stopped on something that made her gasp. A large animal lay motionless on the cave floor. It looked like a wolf, but much bigger than any wolf on Earth. It had 6 legs instead of 4, and its fur seemed to glow with soft blue and green lights. Even in death, it was magnificent. The creature was easily as big as a small horse, with powerful muscles and sharp claws. Recognized it immediately as one of the top predators on this world. But the crying sounds were not coming from the dead mother. 3 small shapes huddled against her still body. His breath caught in her throat. They were bobbies, cubs no bigger than house cats. Their fur had the same glowing patterns as their mother, but much dimmer. They were making the most heartbreaking sounds had ever heard. Knelt down slowly, not wanting to scare them. The cubs looked up at her with large, frightened eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. They were clearly hungry and cold. The smallest one was barely moving. Could see wounds on the mother's body. It looked like she had been in a fight with other and lost. The rules were clear. Had been trained not to interfere with nature on alien worlds. She was supposed to observe and record, nothing more. Saving these cubs could change the natural balance of life on this planet. It could affect her research. It could even be dangerous. But as watched the smallest cub try to wake its dead mother, pushing against her with tiny paws, something broke inside her heart. These were bobbies. They were scared and alone and going to die without help. Had never been good at following rules when someone was suffering. She reached out slowly with one hand. The biggest cub, clearly the bravest, sniffed her fingers and then pressed against them. It was warm and soft, despite the glowing patterns in its fur. Felt something she had not expected. The cub seemed to trust her immediately. "It's okay," whispered, even though she knew they could not understand human words. "I've got you now." She carefully picked up all 3 cubs. They were heavier than they looked, but they felt solid and healthy except for being hungry. The cubs clung to her jacket with small claws that did not hurt. Could feel them relaxing against her warmth. Looked at the dead mother one more time. She wished she could have saved her too. But these 3 little ones still had a chance. Made up her mind. Rules or no rules, she was not going to let them die. The walk back to the research station took longer with the cubs in her arms. They stayed quiet most of the way, but could feel them getting weaker. She needed to figure out what to feed them quickly. Her station had equipment to analyze biological needs and create synthetic food, but she had never tried to feed alien predator bobbies before. Back at the station, set up a warm, soft area for the cubs using blankets and heating pads. They huddled together immediately, their glowing patterns getting a little brighter in the warmth. Ran tests on small samples of their saliva to figure out what nutrients they needed. While the computer worked, sat with the cubs. The biggest one, which she decided to call Nova because of its bright patterns, seemed to be the leader. It kept checking on the other 2 and positioning itself between them and any possible danger. The middle-sized cub was more careful and alert, watching everything with intelligent eyes. Named it Echo. The smallest one, which she called Spark because its glow was the dimmest but somehow the most determined, stayed close to side. The test results showed that the cubs needed proteins similar to those found in Earth meat, but with different vitamins and minerals. Food synthesizer could make something close. She prepared the first meal, making it soft and warm like milk. Feeding them was easier than she had expected. They seemed to understand that she was trying to help. Nova was the first to try the synthetic food, and when it seemed safe, Echo and Spark followed. They ate hungrily, making small purring sounds that vibrated through hands. As the cubs ate, realized what she had done. She had just adopted 3 alien predators. She had no idea how big they would grow or how dangerous they might become. She did not know if others would come looking for them. She did not know if her bosses would approve of her decision. But looking at the 3 small creatures now sleeping peacefully in the warm blankets, knew she had made the right choice. Sometimes being human meant doing what felt right, even when it was against the rules. These cubs needed a mother, and was ready to be whatever they needed her to be. Outside the station, the alien night fell with its 2 moons rising over the crystal caves. Settled in to watch her new family sleep, wondering what challenges tomorrow would bring. 2 weeks passed like a dream never wanted to wake up from. The cubs had grown stronger and more active every day. What started as 3 weak, frightened bobbies had turned into 3 playful, loving creatures that followed everywhere she went. Nova had become the clear leader of the small pack. She was always the first to explore new things and the first to protect the others if something seemed dangerous. Her glowing patterns had grown much brighter, shifting from blue to green when she was happy or excited. She liked to sit on shoulder while she worked at her computer. Echo was the thoughtful one. She watched everything carefully before making any moves, had noticed that Echo could sense things the others missed. Sometimes Echo would alert them to flying creatures approaching the station long before instruments detected anything. Her patterns stayed mostly blue, but they pulsed in complex rhythms when she was thinking. Spark was still the smallest, but she had the biggest personality. She loved to curl up against Neck while she slept, purring with a sound that felt like a tiny motor running. Spark's patterns were the most colorful, shifting through blues, greens, and sometimes even hints of purple. She was also the most affectionate, always seeking out's touch. Had learned their individual food preferences, play styles, and sleeping habits. She talked to them constantly, even though they could not understand her words. But somehow, they seemed to understand her feelings. When felt sad or worried, the cubs would gather around her and purr until she felt better. The research station had become a real home, had moved her bed into the main lab so she could sleep near the cubs. She had created climbing structures for them using spare equipment. The cubs had learned to use a special bathroom area had set up, proving they were far more intelligent than anyone had previously believed. Official research had suffered, but her personal observations of intelligence and behavior were revolutionary. She documented everything. The cubs showed problem-solving abilities, emotional intelligence, and social cooperation that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about the species. But knew this peaceful time could not last forever. She had read all the files about social structure. They lived in packs with strict rules about territory and family. Others would eventually notice that these cubs were missing, tried not to think about what would happen then. The answer came on a quiet evening while was teaching the cubs a new game with colored lights. Spark was the first to react, her patterns suddenly shifting to bright red as she pressed against leg. Then Echo's head snapped up, her ears turning toward the station's main door. Nova moved to position herself between and the entrance. Security system activated with warning beeps. Multiple large life forms were approaching the station. His heart started beating faster as she looked at the scanner readings. 12 contacts, all sized, moving in coordinated patterns around the research station. "Stay close to me," whispered to the cubs, even though she knew they were already as close as they could get. She activated the station's defensive shields and external cameras. What she saw on the screens made her mouth go dry with fear. 12 adults surrounded the station. They were huge, much larger than the cub's mother had been. Their glowing patterns were bright and aggressive, pulsing with reds and oranges that had never seen before. In the center of the group stood the largest had ever seen. It had scars across its face and patterns that seemed to shift like flames. The big stepped forward and made sounds that translation computer immediately began analyzing. After a few moments, words appeared on her screen in human language. Human, the translation read, I am Alpha of the Stone Fang Pack. You have taken cubs that do not belong to you. This is against the natural order. This is against our law. His hands shook as she activated the external speakers. She had never used the translation system to speak to a before. My name is Doctor. I found these cubs next to their dead mother. They would have died without help. Death is natural, came the reply. Weak cubs die. Strong cubs survive. This is the way of all since the beginning of time. Your interference is in crime against nature itself. Looked down at the 3 cubs pressed against her legs. They were trembling, but not with fear. They were trembling with anger. She could see their patterns shifting to the same aggressive colors as the adults outside. Even little Spark was trying to look fierce. These cubs are not weak, said, her voice growing stronger. They are intelligent and brave and loving. I will not let you take them. The silence that followed was terrifying. Could see the adult moving restlessly outside, their patterns flashing in what she was beginning to understand was their version of surprised anger. Finally, Alpha spoke again. Human, you do not understand our ways. These cubs must return to the pack to be tested. Those who pass will live. Those who fail will be removed from the gene pool. This is how we remain strong. Over my dead body, said without thinking. The words came from somewhere deep inside her, from a place she had not known existed. These are my cubs now, my pack, and I will protect them with my life. The reaction from outside was immediate. All 12 adults began making loud, aggressive sounds. Their patterns flashed so brightly that had to shield her eyes from the camera screens. It was clearly a threat display unlike anything she had ever seen. But did not back down. She had made her choice 2 weeks ago when she picked up 3 frightened bobbies from a crystal cave. She was not going to change her mind now, no matter how scared she was. You have 3 rotations of this planet to consider your position, Alpha, translated voice said. Surrender the cubs to their rightful pack, or face the consequences of your defiance. We do not make war on other species lightly, but we will do what we must to maintain our laws. Watched as the pack to the tree line, but she could see their glowing patterns in the darkness. They were not leaving. They were setting up a siege. Looked down at Nova, Echo, and Spark. They were looking back at her with complete trust, as if they knew she would never let anything hurt them. Had 3 days to figure out how to protect her family from an entire pack of angry predators. She had never felt more human than she did right now, standing between her cubs and the hostile world outside. The siege began at dawn on the first day, woke to the sound of something heavy hitting the station's outer walls. She sat up quickly and immediately felt 3 small bodies pressed against her. Nova, Echo, and Spark had not left her side all night. Checked the security screens and saw the adult testing her defenses. They were not trying to break in yet, just learning about the station's weak points. One would approach a wall or window, examine it carefully, then retreat. Another would test a different section. They were being methodical and patient. Smart, muttered, and realized she was talking about both the pack outside and the cubs beside her. Nova had positioned herself where she could see all the station's entrances. Echo was listening intently to sounds could not hear. Spark stayed closest to, but her eyes were alert and watchful. Checked her supplies. She had enough food for herself for about 3 weeks, but the synthetic nutrients for the cubs would only last 10 days. The station's power would last much longer, but only if she did not have to keep the shields running constantly. The testing continued all day. The pack would probe the shields with claws and teeth, learning their strength. Could hear Alpha giving orders in the language. Her translation computer picked up fragments: weakness, patience, young ones inside. But was learning too. She watched how the cubs reacted to different threats. When the pack tested the eastern wall, Nova immediately moved to that side of the station. When they checked the roof, Echo's head tilted up and her patterns shifted to warning colors. When they came near the main door, Spark actually growled, a tiny sound that was somehow more fierce than frightening. On the second day, started teaching the cubs basic defensive strategies. She did not know if it would help, but it made her feel better to be doing something. She showed them how to hide in the station's emergency compartments. She taught them hand signals for danger, quiet, and stay close. The cubs learned incredibly fast. Within hours, they could respond to her signals perfectly. More importantly, they started creating their own signals, using their color patterns to communicate with each other and with. Blue meant safe. Red meant danger. Green seemed to mean ready to fight. Documented everything in her research logs. What she was discovering about intelligence was extraordinary. These cubs were not just smart animals. They were showing reasoning abilities, emotional awareness, and tactical thinking that put them on the level of human children. On the third day, the real pressure began. The pack started making noise constantly. They howled and snarled and scratched at the walls all day and all night. Sleep was broken by the sounds of claws on metal and the deep, threatening calls of the adults. But the cubs surprised her. Instead of becoming more frightened, they became more protective. Nova started patrolling the station like a tiny guard. Echo positioned herself where she could monitor the pack's movements through the walls. Spark stayed with but kept her patterns bright and defiant. Realized that the cubs were not thinking of themselves as the ones being protected. In their minds, they were protecting her. "You silly little ones," said softly as she stroked Nova's glowing fur. "I'm supposed to be taking care of you." But Nova looked up at her with those intelligent eyes and made a sound that was learning meant disagreement. The cubs had decided they were a pack and was part of their pack, and they would defend their pack just like any. On the fourth day, water recycling system started having problems. The constant vibrations from the pack testing the walls had shaken something loose. Spent hours trying to fix it while the cubs watched. When she finally gave up in frustration, Echo approached the broken panel and started making small sounds. Watched in amazement as Echo seemed to be listening to the machinery. The cub's head tilted this way and that, her patterns shifting in complex rhythms. Then Echo pawed at a specific panel that had not even considered checking. "No way," whispered, but she opened the panel Echo had indicated. Inside was a loose connection that had indeed been shaken free. Tightened it, and the water system came back online. "How did you know that?" asked Echo, but the cub just purred and rubbed against his hand. The pack outside seemed to sense that something had changed. Their testing became more aggressive. They started hitting the shields harder, making them flicker and drain more power. Realized they were trying to force her to make a choice: surrender the cubs or watch her life support systems fail. On the fifth day, sent her emergency message to the Colonial Authority. Help was weeks away, but she had to try. The cubs watched her record the message, their patterns dim with worry. "This is Doctor at Research Station 7, she said into the camera. "I have made contact with juvenile specimens and am currently under siege by adult members of their species. The cubs show remarkable intelligence and have formed emotional bonds with me. I am requesting immediate assistance and official guidance regarding interspecies adoption protocols." Knew how crazy that sounded. There were no interspecies adoption protocols. She was making it up as she went along. That night, as lay in her makeshift bed surrounded by 3 warm, purring cubs, she wondered if she was doing the right thing. Maybe the pack was correct. Maybe this was interfering with nature in ways that would cause problems later. But then Spark made a tiny sound in her sleep and pressed closer to S's neck. Nova's paw rested protectively on S's arm. Echo's patterns pulsed gently in the darkness, like a keeping watch over their small family. Realized that she did not care about protocols or rules or even the scientific implications of what she was doing. These 3 small creatures trusted her completely. They had chosen her as their mother, and she had chosen them as her children. That made them family, and would protect her family no matter what. Outside, the pack's howls continued through the night, but inside the station, a human woman and 3 alien cubs slept peacefully together, dreaming of a future where love mattered more than laws. The storm that hit on the 10th day was unlike anything had seen on this planet before. Purple lightning cracked across the orange sky, and winds howled louder than the pack of surrounding her station. Watched the weather readings with growing dread. The storm was putting massive stress on all her systems. The cubs sensed the danger too. Their patterns had shifted to nervous yellows and oranges. Nova paced restlessly while Echo pressed herself against the wall, listening to sounds could not hear. Spark stayed close to S's leg, making worried little noises. Then the lights flickered. S's heart sank as she checked the power readings. The storm was overloading her shields at the same time that the pack was pressing their attack. The combined stress was too much for the station's systems. "No, no, no," whispered, frantically trying to reroute power from non-essential systems. But there was nothing left to sacrifice. The shields were already running on minimum power. Outside, she could see Alpha and his pack moving closer to the station. They could sense the weakness in the defenses. Their patterns were bright with excitement and aggression. Another lightning strike hit nearby, and the station's power grid fluctuated dangerously. Made a desperate choice. She activated the emergency shelter in the center of the station, a small, heavily armored compartment designed to protect researchers from environmental disasters. "Nova, Echo, Spark," called softly. The cubs came to her immediately. Hands shook as she opened the shelter door. "You need to get inside right now." The cubs looked at her with confusion. They could sense her fear and sadness, and their patterns shifted to mirror her emotions. "Please," whispered, gently guiding them into the shelter. "I need to know you're safe. Whatever happens out here, you stay inside until it's over. Do you understand?" Nova made a questioning sound but was already closing the door. She sealed it with her emergency codes, making it impossible for the cubs to open from inside. She could hear them making distress sounds, but the shelter would protect them from whatever was about to happen. The shields failed completely just as finished sealing the shelter. The lights went out, leaving only the emergency power glowing dimly. Grabbed her plasma rifle from the equipment locker and checked its charge. She had maybe 20 shots before the weapon was useless. Took a deep breath and opened the station's main door. The pack was waiting for her. 12 massives stood in the purple lightning, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They were even bigger than had realized, their muscles rippling under fur that sparked with bioluminescent patterns. Alpha stepped forward, his face twisted in what thought might be satisfaction. "Human," his translated voice came from her suit's speakers. "You see now that your defiance was pointless. Surrender the cubs and we will allow you to live." Raised her plasma rifle and pointed it directly at S's massive chest. She was 1.5 meters tall and weighed maybe 60 kilograms. He was nearly 3 meters long and probably weighed as much as a small vehicle, but did not lower her weapon. "They're mine now," said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My pack, and I'll die before I let you take them." The silence that followed was broken only by the rumbling thunder overhead. The other looked at each other with what was learning to recognize as surprise. Apparently, Most species were smart enough not to threaten an entire pack of apex predators. Humans realized were different. "So be it," Alpha growled. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Military training took over, and she rolled to the side as massive claws swept through the space where she had been standing. She fired her rifle, and the plasma bolt caught one of the attackers in the shoulder. They yelped and fell back. Kept moving, using the station's external equipment as cover. She was faster and smaller than the pack, and she knew the area better. When 2 tried to corner her near the communications array, she slid under one and put a plasma bolt through the other's leg. But there were too many of them. Shots were accurate, but they were incredibly tough. She had wounded 4 of them, but none were seriously hurt, and her weapon's charge was running low. Alpha himself had stayed back, watching the fight with calculating eyes. When his rifle finally ran out of power, he stepped forward. "You fight well for such a small creature," said as the other pack members surrounded, "but this is over." Dropped the useless rifle and pulled out a plasma knife, the last weapon she had. She was breathing hard and had several cuts from near misses, but she stood straight and ready. "Come on then," said. Moved like lightning for something so large. His claws swept towards head, and she barely managed to duck under them. She slashed with her knife and felt it connect, but's massive paw caught her in the chest and sent her flying. Hit the station wall hard and slumped to the ground. Her knife was gone, lost somewhere in the darkness. Approached slowly, blood dripping from the shallow cut on his arm. "You should have surrendered," he said. Struggled to her feet, swaying but determined. If she was going to die, she would die standing up. Raised his claws for the killing blow. Then the emergency shelter's door exploded outward. 3 small shapes burst from the station, their patterns blazing with colors had never seen before. Nova, Echo, and Spark positioned themselves between and the pack, making sounds that damaged translator could barely process. But Alpha and his pack froze as if struck by lightning. The cubs were not making random sounds. They were speaking informal, using words and phrases did not recognize. But whatever they were saying, it was making the adult pack very uncomfortable. His translator finally caught up and began displaying words: pack law, orphan right, chosen guardian, blood debt, honor claim. Alpha stared at the 3 cubs, and what was beginning to understand was shock. The other pack members began backing away, their aggressive patterns fading to confused purples and blues. "Impossible," whispered. Nova stepped forward and made a long, complex statement that's translator rendered as, "By the ancient laws of our people, we 3 claim guardian right. This human fought for us. This human bled for us. This human chose us when our birth mother fell. We choose her in return. Honor the old ways, Alpha, or be known as one who breaks the sacred bonds." Stared at her cubs in amazement. They had learned to speak formal by listening to the pack's communications. More than that, they knew laws and traditions that had never heard of. The pack looked to Alpha, waiting for his decision. The great leader stood silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between and the 3 small cubs who had just challenged everything he believed. Finally spoke. "The young ones invoke rights older than memory," he said slowly. "Rights that have not been used in 1,000 seasons, but the law is the law." Realized that something extraordinary had just happened. Her cubs had not just saved her life. They had changed everything. The ancient law the cubs had invoked was called the Guardian's Choice, and it had not been used for over 1,000 years. Alpha spent 3 days consulting with the eldest members of his pack before he could give his answer. During those 3 days, and the cubs waited in the damaged research station. The pack did not attack again, but they did not leave either. They kept their distance while their leader struggled with a decision that could change society forever. Use the time to repair her systems and tend to her wounds. The cubs stayed close to her, their patterns cycling between worried blues and determined reds. They seemed to understand that their bold move had created a crisis for everyone. On the third evening, Alpha came to the station alone, met him at the door, the cubs flanking her like tiny bodyguards. "The law you invoked is real," said, his translated voice heavy with reluctance. "In ancient times, when our people were fewer and the world more dangerous, orphaned cubs could choose their own guardians if their birth pack fell. The guardian could be from another pack, another clan, or in rare cases, another species entirely." Waited, hardly daring to breathe. "But the law also demands proof," continued. "The chosen guardian must demonstrate that they can raise young to be strong, capable, and worthy of our species. If they fail, the cubs are forfeit." "What kind of proof?" asked. "The cubs will be tested as they grow," explained. "Physical challenges, mental trials, and demonstrations of values. If they prove weak or unsuitable under your care, they will be reclaimed by the pack." Looked down at Nova, Echo, and Spark. They were listening intently, their patterns bright with understanding. When Nova looked up at and made a confident sound, knew her answer. "I accept," said. Alpha nodded slowly. "Then by the old laws you are now guardian to these 3 cubs. But know this, human, you are responsible not just for their survival, but for their honor. Fail them, and you will answer to me personally." "I understand," replied. "I won't let them down." The pack departed that night, but left one member behind. An older female named Senna would visit regularly to observe the cubs' progress and report back to the pack. Was nervous about this at first, but Senna turned out to be more curious than hostile. "I have never seen cubs develop like this," Senna told after her first evaluation. "They are learning things no their age should know, but they are also growing strong and confident. It is interesting." The months that followed were unlike anything had expected. Raising alien predator cubs was challenging in ways she had never imagined. As they grew, their personalities became even more distinct. Nova developed into a natural leader. She was brave, intelligent, and protective of both and her siblings. But under influence, she also learned something rare among mercy. When Nova hunted the small creatures around the station, she killed quickly and cleanly, never taking more than she needed. Echo became the thinker of the group. Her ability to sense vibrations and sounds developed into something almost supernatural. She could detect approaching storms hours before instruments picked them up. She could sense the emotional states of other creatures from their breathing and heartbeat patterns. But she also learned patience and careful observation from watching work. Spark, despite being the smallest, became the emotional heart of their little pack. She was the first to comfort anyone who was hurt or sad. She learned to read human expressions and body language better than had thought possible. When had nightmares about the siege, Spark would curl up against her neck and purr until the bad dreams went away. The cubs were indeed growing strong, but they were also growing different from typical. They hunted together but shared their catches. They competed with each other but also cooperated in ways that surprised even Senna. Most importantly, they had learned to extend their pack loyalty beyond their own species. When a group of small, herbivorous aliens took shelter near the research station during a storm, typical young would have seen them as prey. Cubs saw them as creatures that needed protection. Nova organized a guard rotation to keep larger predators away until the storm passed. "This is not behavior," Senna told, but her tone was thoughtful rather than critical. "Yet they are strong and capable. They honor their pack bonds. They show courage in the face of danger. Perhaps strength comes in more forms than we previously understood." 2 years after the siege, received an unexpected visitor. Alpha himself came to the station, but this time he was accompanied by representatives from the governing council. Cubs, now nearly half-grown and magnificent, greeted the pack leader with respect but no fear. "The tests are complete," announced. "Your cubs have proven themselves worthy by any measure our people use, But more than that, they have shown us new possibilities for what it means to be. Felt a surge of pride as she watched Nova, Echo, and Spark stand tall beside her. They had grown into beautiful creatures, their patterns bright and confident, their bearing proud but not arrogant. The Council has decided, continued, that your unique approach to raising young offers benefits we had not considered. We would like to establish formal relations between our species, with your cubs serving as ambassadors. Could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her decision to save 3 frightened bobbies had led to the first peaceful contact between humans and. Over the following years, Nova, Echo, and Spark became bridges between 2 very different species. They helped establish trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. They showed both humans and that family could transcend species, that strength could include compassion, and that the universe was big enough for many different ways of living. Never regretted her choice to save the cubs, even when they grew large enough to accidentally knock her over with enthusiastic greetings, even when their hunting brought unwanted presents to her lab, even when their playful wrestling matches destroyed furniture. She especially never regretted it on quiet evenings when the 3 of them would curl up around her while she read or worked. Their purring would fill the research station with a sound like distant thunder, and their patterns would pulse gently in the darkness like living stars. Had learned something important about being human during those first desperate days in the crystal caves. Sometimes the most important choice was not the logical one or the safe one. Sometimes the most human thing to do was to love without conditions, protect without counting the cost, and choose family not by blood but by heart. The cubs had chosen her, and she had chosen them. That choice had changed not just their lives, but the future of 2 entire species. All because one human woman could not walk away from 3 frightened bobbies who needed a mother.